I think we're live.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitics and Money, formerly known as Geopolitics in Conflict. Excited to be with you. I know it's not Thursday. Usually we do this on Thursdays, not Tuesdays. But again, because it was, you all know what happened in the market the last 48 hours. And of course, the ramification of those tariffs that Mr. Trump embarked on and all that stuff. So this is what we're going to be addressing today, because to those who say there's already an argument here in Washington, oh, this is not going to harm the American citizens and all that. It's nonsense.
It's actually have a little bit of a different take on this situation because, yes, there are very clear ramifications to tariffs. And certainly the way that President Trump has done this has been wildly chaotic. However, I think there's actually a surprise twist to this. And I think there's actually a very different reason that Trump is going after this. So I want to talk about a couple of things in this show. First of all, reciprocal tariffs, because that's absolutely not what's happening. But some very smart people have figured out actually what is happening and how this is the tariffs on these countries are actually being calculated, because the whole reciprocal tariff thing is just a joke. It's absolutely not accurate. But they have figured out what that actual calculation is for what tariffs are being put on which countries. And it has to do with the trade deficit. But then I also actually think there is a fundamentally very, very different reason for why these tariffs are in, why President Trump has sought out these tariffs at all. So if you guys are interested in kind of the deep dive of this, that's why we thought it was really important, because a lot of talking heads on the left are like, this is the end of the world. But on the right, they're like, well, this is the savior of America. Okay, well, the truth is probably somewhere in between. It's probably not either thing. So
yeah, but I don't look at it as a savior of them.
No, but you're not
Trump
a
is not
Republican either.
Yeah, Trump is not. I mean, I read this morning for a research in Yale University as far as the budget. It was there's a place called the analysis lab. Yeah, the analysis lab or a budget lab or something like that in Yale University. And here's what it said: is that the estimation now for when the tariffs were put the first time on April 2nd, and they only going with the calculations of 10%. We're not talking any further than that. Just 10%. Exclude Canada and Mexico. Get that out of. We look at the rest of the world. That in itself will cost the American household an extra $3,800, almost $4,000 a year, which is an increase of about 2.3. Now, I did see another research that showed between $4,000 and $8,000 increase for a family, for the household of a family here in the U.S. So it becomes the question of okay, how is this going to benefit the Americans?
Okay, so here's how. Let's dive into this, because the question that you're asking really is fundamentally the right question. Is because tariffs on the outside, and I think the Trump administration has done a horrible job of communicating about tariffs, okay? Because they're shutting down the voices completely that say, well, tariffs are going to inflate the price of things, right? So the voices that are saying that tariffs are inflationary. Now, there are a bunch of articles coming out right now. I have a bunch of videos and a bunch of articles, but I'll share one of them. Let's see. I'm going to share this video. If you want, do you want to start with this video, David? This is, let me take it off for a second and then share it with you guys. So that's, yeah, you have to stay muted. Okay, let's take a listen at sort of what the Trump administration is saying about why these tariffs are so important.
Sounds like you're saying, trust us. And are you worried that at some point Americans are going to feel like there's a bunch of billionaires in Washington who are playing Russian roulette with our retirement?
$2 trillion deficits don't bother you at all. How could you ask me, while we're running a $2 trillion deficit, and not care? You're destroying The people who have run this country before are destroying the future for my children and my children's children. I can't have a 50, 75. We have a $36 trillion deficit. And we used to run deficits of 400 billion. Now 2 trillion, everybody's like, who cares? I tell you what, who cares? Donald Trump cares. And when we balance the budget, you know what that means? That means our deficits stop. Interest rates come smashing down. His goal is to have external.
Okay, pay attention to what he's saying right here, okay? Because I think that this is actually really, really important, and it's kind of a hidden in plain sight thing.
Revenue. You know, the way I think about it, we all are so used to paying taxes. We're so used to it. We have like Stockholm syndrome. You know, don't stop the Internal Revenue Service, God forbid. How about this? The rest of the world leans on our economy, breathes off our economy. Not only is our economy $29 trillion GDP, but we consume $20 trillion a year. We are the buyer of everybody's stuff. We buy everybody's stuff. So who's more important? The people who sell stuff or the people who buy stuff? So we are the buyer of everybody's commodities, products, goods and services. Everything comes from us, right?
Okay. So he said a couple of really important things. First of all, this guy isn't wrong. Okay. He's not necessarily wrong about this. This is just not a particularly nuanced or double-sided argument here. But let's address, I mean, this was kind of going to be the end of this video, but I think really it's fundamentally the crux of it. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about why the tariffs are what they are, because the way that the Trump administration has put it, so he just talked about this a little bit. He talked about the fact that we have a trade deficit, like a very large trade deficit, pretty much across the globe, right? Which means we buy more from country A than they buy from us. And that is goods exclusively. We're not looking at the services sector at all, in which case the United States actually has a surplus. It does not have, for overall, it has a surplus. That doesn't mean every country, but it has a surplus in service. Okay, so now let's look at goods, for example. So what it appears the calculation actually is the deficit.
Yeah.
And let me see if I can find, my somebody, there's a guy named James Surowiecki. Let me share his tab so you guys can see this. He actually is one of the very, very intelligent people who figured this out. But now it's fairly common. I think it's fairly common knowledge as people are trying to figure out how this deficit actually happened, or how the actual numbers were formulated. So apparently it is the trade deficit times, oh my gosh, let me see if I can math, but it's basically the trade deficit at half the percentage. So if it is, for example, 60, then it's slashed into 34, which is what happened with China. So let me see if I can find his exact tweet breaking it down. But that's basically what it is. It's the trade deficit in half and percentage wise. So that's a very different calculation than reciprocal tariffs, because Donald Trump is talking about tariffs being reciprocal. They're not. China does not have a 34% overall tariff on the United States. That's not accurate.
Yeah. Well, it's the idea of you think about it this way. And again, I am not an economist. It's not my area but I at least understand the basics of it. So that allows me to think in terms of what is pragmatically speaking makes more sense. Well, when you think about, for example, as the Trump embarks on this tariffs and so forth, maybe going about it the wrong way, in my opinion. So that's the way I see it. Because here's the thing. How can you fix, for example, let's say we go with this notion of the trade deficits, let's say of 12, 14 trillion dollars. Okay? I'm sorry, for the trade deficit, let's say hypothetically it's about $2 or $3 trillion. Okay, you want to go after this because that was the whole reason for why these tariffs are implemented. But at the same time, what you are doing in this case, President Trump, destroying a market capital of about 12 to 14 trillion dollars to save $2 trillion. Does it make any sense to you?
No. Okay. But so let's go into his calculations, because it's very possible that this is close to accurate. So David, can you see that? It's really small. I want to make it a little bigger for people.
Yeah, right there. It's clear.
Okay. So he is very much on the left side. So just, the slants either direction have been really extreme. So if you're on the left, you, like I said, you think that this is like the absolute end of the world. And the reasonings that you have for it are some of them absolutely make sense, right? Like the market crashing, for example, not just here in the United States, but the market crashing. And then also, it tariffs, especially the amount of how high the tariffs are very challenging to absorb by either suppliers, importers, or retailers, right? It's hard to absorb that level of tariff. Okay, so here we have, let me see, the reciprocal tariffs. Okay, so there we have reciprocal tariffs. There's one set, and then let me show the next. Okay, so here we go.
Yeah.
All right, so those are that. So basically what he says, so just figured out where these they are, I wouldn't call them fake tariff rates, but they're not reciprocal tariffs the way that they're being stated. They didn't actually calculate tariff rate plus non-tariff barriers as they said they did. Instead, for every country, they just took our trade deficit with that country and divided it by the country's exports to us. Thank you. That's a much better way to say it than I said it. So we have 17.9 billion trade deficit with Indonesia. Its exports to us, to US, are 28 billion. 17.9 divided by 28 equals 64, which Trump claims is the tariff rate Indonesia charges us. But that's not true. So let's come down here to Indonesia. And what is right here? Where's Indonesia? Right here. So what is half of 64? It is, in fact, 32. And that's exactly the number that we have here. So so if you go and do this math with all of the countries, some of them round up, like I think China rounds up a little bit, but some of them round up. But overall, this appears to be the tariff that is imposed on that particular country. The next part that we have that's really important is China is now hitting back.
About 34%, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And we'll get into this. Let me just share something here about from Feller. Leo Feller is a chief economist. So I had a chance to read. That's what I'm saying. Sometimes you read up on things just to get a common sense and a basic understanding of where things are. So coming from a chief economist will sort of, for me personally, will make me want to hear and listen to what he has to say. And his argument, which makes perfect sense, when you consider about the import that we do here in the US for about based on his recent calculation, $3 to $4 trillion. So this is what is worth of goods that we import. So here is the thing. If we are to tax, and this is his argument, and I couldn't agree more because it's common sense. If we are to tax it at an effective rate, let's say 30%, okay, of these goods, that means what? If tariffs are effectively around 30%, that means that's going to translate to collectively for the American household, which is going to be paying about an extra $1 trillion for all this. And that in itself translates to about $7,700 per household. And this is where you need to understand, in addition to what we're already paying for the imported goods. So that's what the imposed tariffs is going to do, because we're trying to level the prices on the other side. But even if we are even them up here, they're still going to be somehow a little bit high. And second, who's going to bear the cost of that? It's us consumers.
Well, so that's a phenomenal point, and that is the largest argument. But I do want to bring some nuance into this conversation, because first of all, the American consumer is really stretched thin. So one of the things that has become really clear over this tariff, so two things have become really clear. first of all, most countries, except for China, which is the big one that matters really anyway, are very interested in coming to the table. So I think it's now 70 countries have come.
China is not.
No, China is not.
China is not. And I don't think so they will ever agree. Because what we're trying to do is force them into the negotiations. They are in a much better position. They are not.
Well, okay, so they are and they aren't. So let me address the 70 countries that have come first.
Those are weak. They won't. They won't matter, in my opinion.
They don't fundamentally matter.
I'm
well, I mean, they do matter. Okay?
Well, to a degree.
In terms of global economy, less so.
Yeah.
What is happening is there are a lot of concessions made on several sides. So, for example, South Korea has agreed to actually pay for the military presence that the United States has there. So they're going to pay the United States to protect, which seems actually fairly reasonable. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's some things that are coming out of it that are very positive. However, what Trump seems to fundamentally be trying to do in this specific piece of this is to close the gap in the trade deficit that we have with country XYZ, with whatever country we have. However, there's a couple of key problems to that. The first is that the United States doesn't manufacture enough currently, I believe, to be able to accommodate for that. People in Indonesia are not going to buy. Oh no! Oh, where did you go?
No, it's not.
You took your cell phone.
I got it.
Okay. I was like, nothing's wrong with the feed.
I'm still here.
Okay, so the fundamental issue with that is people in Indonesia are not going to buy American goods. American goods are, number one, too expensive, and number two, they cannot get the needs that, let's say, from China or cheaper goods in other places. They can't get them from the United States. And I do see a push towards manufacturing coming back to the United States. That's fantastic, but that's not actually really going to happen for another decade or so because it takes a while to build up infrastructure. Okay, so that aside, but that seems to be a goal, is to have either a positive, so either a surplus, either a trade surplus with that country, or at least break even in terms of wiping out whatever deficit we have in terms of trade. Like I said, this does not take into account the service surplus that the United States has at all. Okay, so that's one piece of it. The next piece of it, and like I said, guys, I think something fundamentally very different is happening with tariffs. And I want to talk about that last because it's really, really important. And it's what I personally believe. And a lot of people have started jumping on that bandwagon. And it's because of something that Ray Dalio said. So I'll address that at the end, but that's what I really think is happening. And I think if that is the case, it's actually brilliant. So there's all this stupid stuff that's happening, and it's happening in this stupid, chaotic way. But if what I think is happening, it's actually also genius. So I would like to say, I think this was done poorly and awfully in every way, but if it's true, it's really smart. Okay.
Yeah.
China. Let's dive into China, because China, so did you see there is counter tariff operations that were released by bloggers in China? Wah, wah.
Yeah.
They were released by bloggers. So we'll see. But Trump is threatening an additional 50% tariff on goods imported to the US if Beijing doesn't withdraw their 34% counter tariff.
Which I don't see them doing that. Because here's the thing. You have to understand, for example, when the stock market wiped out about $9.6 trillion since the inauguration of Donald Trump. So, and you all saw what happened the last 48 hours, what happened to the stock market. So you're going to think in terms of how other countries are going to react. Especially if we are to think about China. What China today is not China of the 80s. This is what Mr. Trump is not getting. He doesn't understand that conditions have changed. The world has changed. So for China, they are going to go along with whatever they want to do, because you can arm them, you can force them into the negotiating table. This is like where I've read somewhere this morning where somebody was talking about, oh, Iran capitulated to the US. That's nonsense. People are making this YouTube stuff. Iran,
Sure, of course.
come on,
of
people.
course.
I mean, have
It's
some.
YouTube. Anyone can have an opinion about
Yeah, but
anything,
at the same time, I get
which
concerned.
I think
I
that's
get
great.
concerned for our community because you don't want them to be misled. When you read something like that, that's it. In this case, just as an example, Iran capitulated to the US. No, it's not. Go educate yourself about this before you say something like this. So the same thing I would say about in China, in China's case, excuse me, regarding the tariffs, they want to head with the 34%.
Yes,
As a matter of fact, here is now where China is going to hold the US by on a very tight position. Do you know we are working right now? We are working on a 6th generation for some fighter jets.
Yes.
And the 6th generation, which by the way, China already launched its own.
Yeah.
And this 6th generation fighter jets need a specific rare earth mineral that China has control over.
Yeah.
So what China ended up doing? They stopped the shipments of that rare earth mineral. Ain't coming. So, and that tells me right there for the Chinese, they're gonna play hardball because they are in a position to do so. Because economically speaking, where my concern is going to be is for other countries, the like of, I believe, Indonesia. I am even questioning Singapore to a degree. India is a lost cause. Why am I saying those countries, especially Indonesia, I believe, and India? Because they decided not to retaliate against Mr. Trump out of fear. But here is where the problem is, especially when it comes down to Indonesia being as part of the ASEAN. ASEAN can enter into some sort of an agreement with China, almost if creating a free trade zone.
Right.
I mean, imagine that would happen. As a matter of fact, Elon Musk now is calling for a free trade zone between Europe and the US.
Right. And quite frankly, I think a free trade zone is a fantastic idea. I think that's almost kind of what the world needs right now, is to allow real free trade, not fake free trade, real free trade. And I do understand, I do understand the right side's argument that tariffs are a tax on the other country. But in reality, and I do understand the left side that tariffs are a tax on the people. But the truth is somewhere in between. So right now we have corporations that are posting record freaking profits, but the average person that is actually working at that company is not seeing the benefit of that. Okay. So they're eating away. Corporate America has eaten away at the core of the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. And we've watched it happen. If you look at what went down, God, maybe this was a year ago. I can't even believe it's that long ago. But when the auto manufacturers, they were under heat from the unions because they were posting record profits, and their employees, the unions went to bat for their employees. Okay, UPS also did the same thing. There was one from UPS. But what did the corporations end up doing? They ended up laying people off. And so, yes, they paid some people more, but then they laid a whole bunch of people off.
Yeah.
That's also what's happening right now. If you're looking at what corporations have actually started laying off people, it's happening across the board. It's not a ton, but it is some people. So they are doing layoffs to sort of, I guess, pay for the tariffs, more or less. They're going to find ways to cut costs and maintain profits, but they are going to have to eat some of that. So it is becoming very clear that that corporations are going to have to actually eat some of the tariffs, which means they are going to have to pay some taxes. This is a huge point of contention where, large corporations pay pretty much nil in taxes.
Yeah.
Or very wealthy individuals who pay pretty much nil in taxes. So there is some of that. It is more nuanced than like all bad or all good. There's going to be some mix. What I think is that most tariffs are probably going to go away or go to the I think 10% baseline is kind of crazy. But I think they're going to go to that point. But I want to go back to China for a second, because I want to go over. So China has had a very serious, very, very staunch stance on this. they're saying they will fight to the end in this tariff war, and more or less they have to. So Chinese suppliers fundamentally, like if you look at the Chinese suppliers that are supplying Walmart, for example, they're making 2 to 3%. They're not making 25. They cannot absorb 25 regardless, or 30, 34 or 74, whatever it ends up being. They actually can't absorb it. So I don't blame them, but they're taking a very hard stance on that. And I think fighting to the end is not a very good plan on either side.
Yeah, but for the Chinese, that just cements their possession regarding where the economy is headed, the global economy that is. Because here is the thing. For us, the solution is going to be, as always, printing money.
Okay.
That is what it's going to, well, what that's going to do to our currency, and then what that's going to do to us consumers.
Okay.
So
let me dive into what I think is actually happening. And I said this a couple of episodes ago, a couple of shows ago, but this is what I actually think is happening. Let me share this article because I think it's so interesting because other people are talking about it right now. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm very excited about this. Okay, check out this MSNBC article. Trump is pressuring the Federal Reserve to save his tariffs. It should ignore him. No, it shouldn't. Okay, the Federal Reserve right now, I don't think anybody is a fan of the Federal Reserve for a whole bunch of reasons. But do you remember? Let me see if I can share this. This is an interview with Ray Dalio that happened in Singapore about a month ago. And I tried to share this video before, but I couldn't share it. So bam, let me share it. Please, guys, let me know if you can hear it. It's so important. And I really want you guys to hear this video because this is what I actually think is happening. All right, let me know if you can hear it.
The first thing is the debt issue. We have a very severe supply-demand problem. So we think there's debt, and some people think, oh, we'll handle it because we've handled it so far. But I don't think they understand the mechanics of that. By the way, I've written the draft of a book that anybody can see on social media, on LinkedIn, that goes through the mechanics of the debt. But there's a supply-demand problem, so that they have to sell a quantity of debt that the world is not going to want to buy. And that's a set of circumstances that is imminent. Okay, that's paramount importance. Then we're going to have to deal that the deficit must go from what will be projected now to be about 7.2% of GDP to about 3% of GDP. Otherwise, there will be a supply-demand problem. Okay, that's a big deal. You are going to see shocking developments in terms of how that's going to be dealt with. Things that may not have happened in our lifetimes, but things that have happened throughout history. So that's an immediate consideration.
Wait,
the interest rate.
What do you mean, austerity like that?
There are many. What do you?
Guys, do whatever you can to turn your volume up. I'm so sorry it sucks. This is very frustrating because there's something wrong with his mic in this like ridiculously expensive like show that they're doing. There's something wrong with his microphone, but do whatever you can to up the sound because it is absolutely worth hearing what he has to say. Because basically what he's saying in this is that the United States, nobody wants to buy our debt. Not only, and he's not saying this in this, but this is fundamentally true. We service about $1 trillion worth of debt. Okay. So that is an unbelievable amount of money that is being paid out to service debt and specifically service interest. Okay. What's happening right now with the Fed? The Fed has raised interest rates and raised interest rates and raised interest rates to combat what? COVID, to combat the COVID inflation that all of us are suffering through right now. Okay, so what he's saying is that basically the Federal Reserve has made it so the interest rate on this debt, I mean, this debt has been accumulating for a long time, so this is not just it's not just one president's problem. Okay, this has been every president since somebody I don't particularly like, but Bill Clinton, who balanced the budget. It's every president since that who has caused this problem. Okay. So what Ray Dalio is saying here is that we have a really severe supply and demand issue with debt. Now, what this article was talking about over here, sorry guys about the bad sound, man, I'm going to put this link in the box. Just check this out. Yeah, did you guys get it? Okay, check out this entire interview with Ray Dalio if you can. Okay, but Trump is pressuring the Federal Reserve to save his tariffs, and MSNBC thinks that they shouldn't, but I think that they should, and I think that this is actually what's happening, David. What I think is actually happening is that Donald Trump's administration is trying to pressure the Fed to lower interest rates so that he can refinance our debt.
Yeah, well, that's why there's a tension between now Powell, the head of and Donald Trump. It's not coming up to the surface, but it's bad. It's very, very, very bad. So
absolutely, yeah. But that's phenomenal because right now the Fed has been like, oh, we'll lower interest rate a little bit. Here's how we lower interest rates a little bit more. Okay, but they're not meaningfully lowering interest rates. Yeah. And if we're going to, because the debt, what Ray Dalio is talking about here is that if we do not get our debt to GDP ratio lower, no one is going to want to buy our debt, and we are fundamentally screwed as a country.
Well, we've been. I mean, if really Mr. Trump wants to really fix this to a degree, let's start with cutting down the defense budget. Let's start with cutting down this kind of stuff first, then we go from there. So you're taking our tax dollars and giving them to other countries, and you are going through the tariffs that we're going to have to bear the cost of it. I understand if you want to defend our sort of market share and all that stuff, but there are ways of doing it.
But that's what I'm saying. It's not defending market share. It's a fundamentally different thing. So, I mean, yes, he is trying to defend market share, right? He is trying to say we're trying to erase trade deficit globally. Okay, that's a rough sell because we are not physically capable of meeting that demand were it there globally. Okay, we're not capable of meeting that demand. But what we are capable of doing is potentially refinancing our debt here in the United States. Yeah. But to do that, a private institution, the Federal Reserve, which I am not a fan of, and I follow Ron Paul's lead, audit and abolish the Fed. That is my take on that.
Well, I think now that the response of the Chinese really, Trump didn't expect this. And once again, and again, this is my opinion, I think he's operating under that notion of, oh, I can twist arm the Chinese. No, you can't. You can't, because here's the thing. What it shows, at least on part of the Chinese, that they are willing to play tough. No, with Donald Trump. I think this is different from the previous Donald Trump's tenure back then. So, because here is the thing. Instead of, this is what the Chinese are willing to do, playing tough with Donald Trump instead of entering into negotiations, because you can't trust the Americans for that matter. So, and here is the thing. Right before Donald Trump issued the additional tariffs,
the
50%? The added tariffs on tea. What happened to that? He indicated that he is willing. This is Trump saying this, and it's on a record there. And I'm going to share a link with you guys because I used to write for the South China Morning Post. That's what I found the article. He's willing to cut a deal with the Chinese in exchange for, guess what? For Chinese approval to sell TikTok. So what Mr. Trump is trying to do, wanted to hit two birds with one. It's not going to cut it because, first of all, Chinese now embarked on the idea that we're going to push hard and we're going to push back very, very hard. And we are noticing this right now that they put the tariffs on certain poultry products, certain agricultural aspects. There is the other thing that the Chinese retaliatory measures include, and I found out, here's the thing, six linked companies to export sorghum, the poultry,
Yes. Yeah.
and the meals and so forth to China. There is also an additional one, 16 American companies that now China is asking Chinese companies, barring them from supplying the dual use items, good to have both for civilian and military. That's what I said about the sixth generation.
Oh, yeah.
Now the US is going to be, I think Mr. Trump, and again, my opinion, miscalculated, thinking that the world has changed. The world is changing.
Yeah.
And you know what? With all this, there is one other major event that is taking place, nobody talking about.
Yeah.
And that event has to do with 24 countries decide to sign up now to the Russian central bank system. This is the equivalency of SWIFT,
Yeah.
the SPFS,
Yeah.
to bypass. And I have a link for you guys. I'll share it with you later on.
Yeah, Swift is
So,
done for, man.
yeah.
Swift, unquestionably, in my opinion, Swift is done
Yeah,
for.
and this is what it says. It says that 177 financial institutions from 24 countries currently participated in the Russian financial messaging system, SPFS, which was developed as an alternative to the global payment system. So this leads me to me, it's common sense, especially if I go back to the countries I mentioned earlier, like Indonesia, I believe, India, to a degree, Singapore to a degree, why they decided not to retaliate against the US. But at the same time,
well, they're not in a position to.
well, they're not, but at the same time, you know how it is with us, America.
Yeah.
When I say us, I'm referring to the government.
For sure.
You open the door, we kind of abuse it. Look at just what we've been doing instead of retaliating, because exactly what China is doing right now.
Yeah.
But this is also an opportunity for China and ASEAN to come even closer regarding trade. Forget about the Americans.
Well,
that's the way I see it.
I mean, this is an interesting thing that Donald Trump is doing, because like I said, I don't agree with it. Okay. Like, I'm going to be straight up.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it. So I don't agree with the way that he has done it. I mean, he more or less in a very short amount of time caused global chaos. Okay. And, I know people are freaking out about the markets, but this is not the first time markets have crashed before. Granted, this is awful and it's horribly stressful for people. Especially there are the billionaires of the world that, took some hits. I think Elon Musk took like a $4 billion hit or whatever, but he doesn't notice. I mean, I don't think he cares about I think it's $4.4 billion hit, whatever. But I mean, it really is people who had 401ks and all of that. But I mean, if you lived through the 2008 financial crisis, you also watched a bunch of people's 401ks be wiped out. So I think that's why, especially millennials and younger generations are less keen on things like 401ks, because we've now watched 401ks be obliterated several times over. So this is honestly kind of not a new thing. And it's why I really seriously advocate for people understanding their own finances and their own investments and not just farming it out to somebody, because there were people. So my husband and I talk about investment. This is not investment advice. I'm not a financial advisor in any way, but we were talking about Warren Buffett having pulled his money out of the market and a lot of really savvy investors being really cash heavy, which means they were waiting for this to happen. So people who were paying attention knew that something like this was going to happen. And Donald Trump has not been quiet about tariffs. This is not came out of the blue, some crazy thing. He's been really vocal about tariffs for a long, long time. I mean, I think since like the 80s or 90s, I mean, he's been really vocal about tariffs. So it's not surprising that he would take it. What I am fundamentally curious about, though, is how he will handle China, because right now it's a escalation. And I do believe fundamentally China and the United States will come to the negotiating table. And I will say this, if this trade war between China and the US stopped the hot war over Taiwan,
but that just
that would be interesting.
That just hypes from the US can't fight the Chinese. And second,
I know, but it's hype from the Chinese too. Like, Chinese don't want to fight the
the Chinese
either.
China is just saying, you maintain the status quo, they will be fine with that. And they are fine with it. Because I saw in Hong Kong, they did the same. Did they take over Hong Kong?
But the
No, they
only
didn't.
reason that that the U.S. is interested in Taiwan at all is number one, semiconductors, but number two, because they're trying to stifle the rise of China economically.
And they can't.
Right?
We can't.
No, they
That's
can't.
a reality. That's
I
a
absolutely
so.
agree.
And second thing regarding you said that they're
Yeah.
gonna come to a negotiating. It's gonna be on Chinese terms, not the American terms.
I don't know.
That's
I do not
you
know
know,
how this is
you
going
know,
to shake
I
out.
read from different
really
sources. I kind of I won't say this loosely. Seeing what I'm seeing, it's just the Chinese. Because if it were the case, then the Chinese would have not embarked on these strict measures against the Americans. Otherwise,
sure.
they will have no incentive. Why? The same arguments I will make about Iran, for example. So you think about us talking this tough on Iran. But no, it's just hypes. No more, no less. We can fight the Iranians. Same thing, we can fight the Chinese. What we are doing instead is, like I mentioned last time,
it's economic warfare.
Yeah, but what we're trying, if we can use countries inside ASEAN to do our bidding, like we're doing with BRICS regarding India, then we can see something like that. But this is where I believe, and again, I read from different sources. I'm going to share the link with you guys. Here is what I found that Mr. Trump didn't count on. What he didn't count on is that now with his action, it's now precipitated for China to join the CPTPP, which stands for Comprehensive and Progressive Agreements for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Why is this important? Because China applied for it in 2021. And it has not been resolved. And you know who's behind this. So now, because when you consider, and I looked at the countries that are in this, and I am like, okay, I am questioning that. But at the same time, this is how it is. You have the CPTPP, which was born from the ashes of none other than TPP, hold on.
This is like letter salad.
TPP. I used to know it. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. I just remember a 12-member trading bloc that includes, here is where my concern is, includes Australia, Canada, Japan, Mexico, the United Kingdom, Vietnam, and several other major economies. So now what we did with these tariffs regarding the Chinese, we pushing them even further for the Chinese to go ahead.
Well, so I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second, because obviously you are correct. And I think, please hear me, guys, I still think that this was the wrong thing for Donald Trump to do.
Yeah.
What I will say is this, is that manufacturing and the government sold out the United States fundamentally over decades. This is not new. It's like over the last 20, 30 plus years, the offshoring has been so severe that it really has, like, the United States has become a service-based economy, right?
That's
and
true.
A consumer economy of other people's goods. Okay, well, fundamentally, that's made China very wealthy, which honestly, good for them. They're doing some brilliant things economically. Rock on, right? I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but fundamentally, it has stripped the United States of industry.
Well, we're the one who won there. The Chinese
but that's what I'm trying to say. It's not China's fault.
No, it's not
at all. It's absolutely not China's fault. And it really bothers me that anybody tries to say that it is, because it's not.
No, it's not.
China is not who did that. The United States, large corporate interests here in the United States, and the government is who allowed that to happen. Even if you look at, there's like a whole thing about how China is buying this and China's buying farmland and China's buying whatever in the United States. Who lets them do that? Other countries have very strict rules on who can and cannot purchase in their country. The United States doesn't have that. China can buy whatever they want, wherever they want, pretty much. But the United States government did that, not the Chinese. And so it is fundamental that, even so, we're talking auto manufacturers. Okay. First of all, American auto manufacturers are not that great. Okay, they don't have a reputation for being the best
because
in
we
the
cut
world,
we
okay?
cut corners. We cut corners. We don't do things honestly and
Well,
the right way. We
the-
cut corners.
I,
That's the problem.
Well, okay, so part of the reason that that's a problem and part of the reason that they cut corners is because everything is so freaking expensive here, okay? So you're even Ford, who was kind of the last holdout, now manufactures in Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay, but and Trump is actually responsible for that in his first term. He actually is responsible for that based on the trade agreements that he put in place.
Changed, regarding the Canada and Mexico.
Yes, so the ones that he changed, that he's actually responsible for that. But fundamentally, there has not been any incentive for any large corporate interests to bring anything back to the United States.
Yeah.
So the United States has been gutted, absolutely gutted in terms of any valuable really exports that we have to the world. Nobody wants our freaking cars. Nobody the only thing really that we export is technology, and right now, like, China's really
even with that,
speed, right?
Yeah.
So the United States, to become competitive, to inspire large corporate interests to not take down our country, something really severe had to happen. And I don't know that it could have been done over time. I don't know that Trump could have, like, okay, well, I guess I'll do this little bit here and this little bit there. I mean, I think it may have been all or nothing, but it's because the United States is in such a bad place. And his two choices were, this drives me crazy. There was an article I was reading. I think it was oh my God, this MSNBC article. I cannot stop with this MSNBC article. Though the Trump administration inherited a strong economy. What?
That's a lie. That's a lie.
MSNBC, what are you pushing here?
Let me go to your point. To your point about this, I'm going to share with you guys a feedback from one of our viewers in the community. His name is John Stasvik. Sorry if I mispronounce it. Just listen carefully. Here's what he wrote, and I quote: "The consequences of an economic system based on competition, private interests over collective interest, and scarcity, instability, capitalism. What humanity actually should have is an economic system based on cooperation, collaboration, humanity's collective interests, stability, and abundance. All working class citizens globally must unite to accomplish this and end the insane investments in military violence and destruction, and shifts to investments that secure humanity's economic and social potential to thrive as a global civilization. The answer isn't very difficult once people decide to unite to take responsibility for our collective future. The concentrated ownership model doesn't deliver stability and a high quality and quantity of licit a majority of humanity. The concentrated ownership model that capitalism always degrades to doesn't work for the vast majority and is a threat to all humanity. The workers in every enterprise should share ownership equally. Democracy is the workplace where it is vital." End of quote. Very perceptive when I read it the first time. And I know this is why I share this kind of stuff with our community, because there are some of you guys that contributed to the conversation. And this is why I'm so excited about our community here, because
you guys are brilliant.
To me, guys, you're not an average Joe, average Jane that have you have some fundamental understanding where things are. And that is, to me, what makes more sense. And this is to tie it back to, just to go back to that point about why China is reacting the way it's reacting. It's because they understood fundamentally that the changes on the global stage have changed, whether the West or the US likes it or not. I mean, they are moving forward. Like the first time I mentioned this in Washington, somebody rolled his eyes when I said, do you know the future in Asia and especially in China? They're like, what do you mean, Mr. O? And I said, you just don't see what's coming.
Well,
you don't see what's coming.
That's to me what a bunch of people in Washington are not the brightest, whoever exists.
They are pathetic, corrupted. This is part of where problems in our system is. If Mr. Trump wants to do all this stuff, whatever, start by the fundamentals. What the fundamentals is, Why aren't you cutting down on the defense budget that is over $1 trillion?
He can't. I think he should, to be
Yeah,
clear.
but well, if
he
he's
should.
able to do this if he's able to bully small countries, why don't you start domestically here first? Why don't you cut down the expenditure of billions to Ukraine and Israel and others and all that? Yeah, to me, that's
obviously that's the thing that makes the most sense. However, Trump is not the king of
No,
the
no, no, no,
United States, despite maybe he wants to be, but he's not.
No.
And so he can't make that kind of decision. He
Yeah.
can't.
In 3 years, he'll be gone, and we'll all have another president who will take things
Who will
differently.
do whatever.
That's how usually. This
But
is why
he
the system.
can't.
Yeah.
And so if you look at defense spending at this point, the defense sector is so large.
It's beyond.
It is. It's
beyond.
absolutely
Yeah.
beyond. It's beyond a single president. It's beyond, Donald Trump. It's beyond Joe Biden. It's beyond Obama. It's beyond all of them. And so if I think if we want if we really want the defense sector to shrink, we must demand no more conflicts. We must demand peace. We must demand that what it is they're selling, we don't want to buy anymore. Because the only reason that any real conflict is allowed to happen is because we allow it, right? We, at the very beginning of the Ukraine conflict, I'll use that because I can't use the other one, but I'll use that at the very beginning of the Ukraine conflict, people were like eating it up, absolutely eating it up. I mean, I think the joke is that Putin cured COVID because all of a sudden no one was talking about COVID anymore. Everyone was talking about Ukraine. And everyone was, especially at the beginning, was really buying into the Putin, ultimate bad evil guy, Zelensky, savior angel from the whole universe. So great. So everyone was
corrupted.
Oh my gosh. But that kind of stuff came out later. It didn't come out at the beginning, right? At the very beginning, it was like, and if you look back to weapons of mass destruction, right? In Iraq, for Saddam Hussein, right? It was Saddam Hussein, who was objectively a bad guy, okay? He was absolutely evil. So there was the evil of Saddam Hussein, and we must protect ourselves from weapons of mass destruction. Okay, well, the weapons of mass destruction weren't there. They were a lie. But we didn't find that out until later. So just don't buy into the next conflict, regardless of what the media says that it is. Just don't buy into it, and then maybe we can stop buying what they are selling.
Well, they're already preparing the Philippines to be on the slaughterhouse, so that's where it's going.
Well, I mean, those small countries, like look at what happened to Ukraine.
Let me say hi to Sunhawk. Hey, thank you so much for your super sticker. Truly appreciate you. And Army with Harmony. Hey,
cool.
Good to see you as always, and truly appreciate you. Do you know Army with Harmony are always gifting a membership to someone? So.
It's very, very thoughtful.
I noticed so many times. So thank you so much. Truly appreciate you for that.
So barring the China thing, because I really don't know how that's going to play out. I'm super curious to see, because I think you're fundamentally right that China right now is in such a different.
Yeah.
It's such a different progression stage in their evolution as an empire,
as a country,
and as a country. Yeah, they're in such a different position that it's very hard right now for the US to just be unilaterally the bully in their specific case. In every other case, it's fairly easy for the United States to do that, but that's not the case with China. And so the retaliatory thing with China, I don't know how that's going to play out. But China right now, for their own strength on the global stage, they cannot back down to the United States. They just can't. To take care of themselves, they can't. But that puts both China and the US in a very precarious situation, which I think is a large reason that the markets went absolutely haywire.
And that was exactly what I used to argue, when I been invited to do some speaking stuff, whatever, to audience, private and military. I will address this kind of issues, and down the road, like I always used to tell the audience, I am not going to talk to you about today. I am going to be talking to you about the next 10 years, the next 15, 20. And they all gave me that look of, what? because and that was exactly one of the arguments I made about China, is that be on the lookout for how transformational the global stage is going to be. And I was lucky enough, and thanks to the community for my trip to China made it. I saw with my own eyes how much investments the government does on its own citizens. And it's reflected through the infrastructure. It's reflected through how everybody is minding their own business, as far as, you got to move on, because there is one major thing in Chinese society. There's a major competition, especially among families, because they want their kids to be at the top. I used to get up very early and step outside to see. And I saw people driving their kids to schools and all that stuff, because they wanted to ensure that their kids have the best. Of course, I asked, and they said, to those who can afford the private schools, that's where they take their kids.
Well, that's the same here.
The competition, it's so massive. But the policies the government is embarking on is to ensure the welfare of their citizens. That's just the way I see it when I used to even give the talks or talk about this one for the.
Well, and that seems clear by the fact that instead of keeping so many people in poverty, China has actually raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So I would never like that. That makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But yes, fundamentally on the global stage, though, China cannot back down.
Yeah.
They just can't. But at the same time, if the United States did nothing, we would also collapse. So,
but we don't do nothing because we are not willing to look inward. Do you know how it is always, even with the humans? You know how easy we shift the blame to others because we are not willing to look inward. We start the problems ourselves, but we don't want. It's human nature. I'm not denying this, but some of us do take responsibility and said, you know what? I screw up on this. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to deal with the consequences, but others are not willing to do that. Absolutely. They prefer to shift the blame.
It's much easier if it's someone else's fault.
Why it's the government is no different. Yeah. If the government was responsible enough, but again, how can we have a government responsible when massive corruption run rampant inside the government?
Well, but that's what I'm trying to say is that right now, corporations are incentivized to bring manufacturing back to the United States. To what extent that'll happen, I don't know.
Yeah.
And yes, it will obviously take a massive amount of time. This is not an overnight process, but perhaps in the next 4 years, that process gets started. Right? That is dealing with stuff here in the United States, here at home. Now, granted, there's a lot of people talking about, well, we're never going to manufacture t-shirts and stuff back here. Okay, that's probably true, right? And also the big question is, if we are going to bring manufacturing back, how are we going to compete with the cheap labor in Vietnam, right? Or in China? How are we? Because it's not cheap labor in China, but it's certainly cheaper than here. I mean, I don't know that there's anywhere more expensive than here. Maybe the EU, which also doesn't produce very much. So there are some fundamental questions in those regards. However, it is actually addressing bringing manufacturing back. And it is addressed. So that is a taking care of the United States thing. I don't know how successful they're going to be. And I don't think it was done the right way, but that is that. And at least I don't know if Trump was really putting China on notice or he was really putting the United States on notice, because the people reaping the benefits for offshoring to China are not just the Chinese. It also is large corporations here. So I think it's more nuanced than just good or just bad. There's clearly bad and there's clearly some good too, especially if what he's trying to do is get the Fed to reduce interest rates so he can refinance our debt. That would be a huge benefit for the United States.
But at the end, Trump is for Trump. He doesn't care. I want to go I want to go to
Trump for sure.
Yeah, I want to go to your point regarding the cost overseas and all that stuff. I remember I took my son one day, and I'm going to share the story with you guys. I took him to a high-end mall right here in Dallas. You know which one I'm referring to here. That's the Park Lane. So high-end mall. And the reason I took him to the mall, because he was at that time talking about Nike, whatever. I said, let's go. I want to show you something. Yes. Didn't want to say anything. I just want to take him to the mall, to this specific Nike store. And I said, why don't you go take a look at some shoes there? So he went in and saw the I said, wow, I didn't realize this one is $260. This
Yeah.
one is $240. I wasn't about to buy it. I wasn't. I just want him to see, and I will explain.
Yeah.
And on our way out, we don't. I said, well, maybe we'll consider down the road, and we'll see. I'll help you with it if you want to buy it, because he has to. You want a
Yeah,
Nike,
of course,
you
of
pay
course.
for it. I'll help you out. And I said, Michael, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How much do you know about production of this? He said, I don't know.
Yeah.
I said, which I knew he doesn't know, but this is to me where the
Oh, it's important
the
that he does
curiosity
know, yeah.
start to trigger his thinking. And I said, do you know where that shoe is produced? He said, no. I said, it's produced way out in Asia, some parts in Vietnam, some parts in Cambodia, some parts in. Now, you saw the price of the shoe, $240 to $260, right? How much do you think that shoe is produced over there? He said, I don't know. So I start breaking down, thanks to him, cost-wise. I said, if I am to guess, most likely that shoe won't cost more than $10 to produce.
If that.
If that.
If that.
Second thing, do you know that the people who are working on this are paid almost less than $1 a day for 8 to 10 hours? That's one. Second thing, how much do you think the cost of the freight to bring that shoe from over there to the US?
Yeah.
Let's say we'll give it about $20 for the insurance and all that. Now, how much the shoe cost? $30, right? You bring it to the US, the transportation from the ports to distribution centers and so forth, add another $10.
Yeah.
How much is that now? $40. Then, once it's all done and settled, the shoe will cost about $45,
Right.
max of $50. Now you saw the shoe, how much it cost? $260. This is when you add the sponsoring athletes, the likes of Michael Jordan, who cleared $94 million just because of his name on the shoe. So I see that's where that cost is going. So for shoe that costs $10 overseas, you are paying $260.
Yeah.
And he was like, his eyes get this big. He's like, what? I said, now you know it's not on me anymore. Now it's your decision. Are you willing to spend $260 on a shoe, or you want to go buy some other brand that costs you less?
Yeah.
Choice is yours, not mine. And he was just shocked, surprised with all that.
It's interesting. I wonder, I haven't done very much research into this, but I wonder, because through Amazon, there's been the rise of the cheap Chinese knockoff that is
and
the
Timo,
same,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And Timo, I mean,
they put in, by the way, the U.S. government is putting restrictions now
on Timo.
on Timo.
Yeah, I mean, Timo,
because it's cheap.
Timu's hit or miss, I mean,
well, I saw some products there worth the money.
Sure,
worth the money.
Absolutely. Some it depends. It's hit or miss, right?
Yeah,
Some things I've gotten, like I think my best friend got me this dress, and she was like, "Yeah, it's from Temu." I didn't know if it was going to be good or not, but it was like $5, and so it was like a velvet dress. But when I pulled it out, it smelled like chemical waste. Like, it was awful. I never wore it.
Not for clothing. You won't want to buy. Even for Amazon, you don't want to buy clothing through Amazon.
No. I'm actually really big. This is just a personal preference, but I believe very much in shopping for what I feel ethically to be the right thing. So to me, I seek out fair trade clothing. I seek out organic cotton. Even if it's less stylish, it's really important to me to buy things that are in line with what I believe in. And I believe in a better planet. But like hands down, I drive my poor husband crazy with this stuff, but I buy things that I personally believe in, even if they're more expensive, and it doesn't matter where they are in the world. But you're absolutely right. The reality of brands like that are absolutely crazy. It's this low quality stuff, but people buy it thinking that it's higher quality because it has a brand name. It's absolutely ridiculous.
My reason for doing this with Michael is wanted to teach him about the value of the dollar. I said, you need to understand, your generation is going to be dealing with it. I'll be gone.
We're dealing with it right now.
Right? I said, you need to start have an understanding of really where things are. And if you don't educate yourself now, it'll be too late. By the time you want to embark, we will be in a different position altogether.
We are literally right now.
Yeah. All right, guys. Before I forget, remember to join me tomorrow. There is a there is a specific meeting taking place today.
Oh,
So I
what is
usually
it?
was
What is
supposed
it?
to talk about it today, but I pushed it to tomorrow because we wanted to do this. It's in Moscow between China, Russia, and Iran
Ooh.
regarding the nuclear.
Yes, check it out. Geopolitical
so
trends, guys.
Here's the link, guys, in the chat box for tomorrow, and you can join me tomorrow at 12. As I said, I had a chance to write one book about Iran, another book about Russia, and I disclosed this kind of you know what I find very convenient
What?
is what I talk about in the geopolitical
Yeah.
realm is the stuff I wrote about also
Oh, cool.
ahead of time.
Yeah.
Ahead of
That
time.
man, that's got to be such a cool.
It does.
feeling.
Very
That's
exciting.
gotta be
When I
such a
shared
cool
yesterday,
feeling.
I shared with the community
Yeah.
about the history of the US in West Asia.
Yeah.
I went all the way back to 1910,
Mhm.
between 1910 1914, during Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
And briefly, it's just, of course, somebody made a comment like, this is an old history. I see you don't get the point, do you?
So here's the thing about humans that
Yeah.
I think you really understand. Okay.
Yeah.
And people like Ray Dalio also really understand. Human beings are pattern driven.
Yeah.
We
that's true.
think that human beings are so random.
No, it's not.
And an individual isn't even random. But let's say an individual is random. Collectively, groups are pattern based. If you can recognize patterns, if you can recognize the cyclical nature of history, for example, then you can predict what is coming next. Like there may be details that you can't predict about it, but overall you can predict what's happening. And you understand patterns really, really well.
I kind of, but also my training. So
well, that part of
remember,
your training
I'm a
is to
former
understand people really
I'm a
well.
former MI, so you kind of acquire this kind of knowledge over the years. So anyway, guys, I hope you guys can join me tomorrow at 12:15, I believe. Yeah, that's what it is. So I'll be talking about really some of what's going on. This is more than just the nuclear file. This one's going to be about, I think,
super interesting.
I think if I am to think now, it's about putting a plan in place.
Yeah,
that's the way I see it.
Donald Trump really shook up some stuff,
Yeah,
man. He really shook up some stuff, for better or worse. And it's probably both, right? Like it really bothers me when it's like all bad, all good.
Yeah.
No, the truth is very much more nuanced than that.
So. Anyway, guys, well, I hope you guys enjoy this, and we look forward to seeing you next time. All right, you take care. Bye-bye.